Hi, I'm Roger Cunning. I'm here to talk to you today about nutrition and how it impacts your health. My title of my slide is called Change is the emphasis. That's called Change Your Food and Change Your Life. And you can see from the pictures that there's a couple of changes being represented here. One is my physical appearance. If you look at the picture of me on your left, that's what I weighed earlier this year in January 2019. That's what I looked like. And the picture on your right is what I looked like, not now, but maybe about 2 or 3 months ago, is what I was looking like then. I've lost even a little bit more weight since then. And also pictured on the left are the kind of foods of what I used to eat. And pictured on the right, I'm holding a couple of plates of foods that I'm eating now. In fact, I started eating this way ever since February 1st of this year, 2019. Without further ado, here's an introduction.
Here's a riddle. How is it that ever since the government began telling us what to eat, we've gotten fatter and sicker? In 1977, when the government first set dietary guidelines, the average American male weighed 170 pounds. He now weighs 197. It's not any better for women, 145 to 170. And you don't need an academic study to know the same thing is happening to kids. Just look around. The weight gain has real-life consequences. The percentage of Americans diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, a condition that can lead to severe medical issues, has risen from 2% in 1977 to over 9% in 2015. In hard numbers, that's 5 million people to over 30 million people. How did this happen? It all started innocently enough in the 1950s when President Dwight Eisenhower had a heart attack while in office. Suddenly, the issue of heart health became a national obsession. Keep in mind, this was an era when scientists had harnessed the power of the atom, unlocked the secrets of DNA, and cured once incurable diseases like polio. Surely there had to be a scientific solution to heart disease. There was, and a charismatic medical researcher from the University of Minnesota named Ancel Keys had it. Cholesterol, Keys claimed, was the villain of the heart disease story. His now famous 7-country study determined conclusively, in his mind at least, that people who consumed high amounts of fat, specifically saturated fat, had higher cholesterol levels and thus higher rates of heart attacks. Lower your fat intake, and you would lower your heart disease risk. The ever-confident Keys spread the gospel. As an influential member of the American Heart Association, he was in a very strong position to do so. There was only one problem. Keys' study was bad science. The sample size was so small, the data collection integrity so shoddy, and the lifestyle variables between the countries he studied so great that his research had no scientific validity. In other words, he asserted a conclusion he couldn't prove. When other scientists questioned Keys' conclusions, they were invariably met with stern responses like people are dying while you're quibbling over data points, and there are great benefits and no risks to adopting this new way of eating. In 1973, the American Heart Association set the dietary limit on saturated fat at 10%. And in 1977, the US government followed suit. Where did the 10% value come from? It didn't come from any scientific data. It was merely a government committee's best guess. This was despite contrary evidence like the 1957 Western Electric Company employee study, showing no difference in heart attacks in those who ate more or less saturated fat. A longer-term study of the same Western Electric subjects in 1981 reached the same conclusion. But again, no one wanted to hear it. To make this all easier to understand and to spread the message to schools, the food pyramid was created. That's the chart you first saw in 3rd or 4th grade, with all the supposedly good foods at the bottom, meaning eat a lot of those, and the bad foods at the top, eat those ones sparingly. What our kids are fed in school, what our military troops are fed on bases, what sick people are fed in hospitals, what crops we plant, and how we raise our cattle are all predicated on this deceptive nutritional concept. As Americans ate less saturated fat, margarine instead of butter, processed oils like corn oil instead of olive oil, low-fat milk, low-fat yogurt, and so on, they also started to eat more heart-healthy grains, exactly what the food pyramid and the updated version called MyPlate advise you to do. As the consumption of saturated fat decreased by almost 40%, the consumption of refined grains, carbohydrates that convert to sugar in the body, increased substantially. Total intake of calories also began to increase. This happened in no small part because food companies took advantage of the low-fat craze. They lowered fat and increased sugar. Suddenly, supermarkets were full of supposedly healthy, low-fat, high-sugar foods. It remains that way today. Foods that are high in sugar stimulate reward centers in the brain and leave us wanting more. Thus, the famous line about potato chips, bet you can't eat just one. The end result is a fatter population with greater and greater health issues, like type 2 diabetes, a problem that's getting worse, not better. How do we get ourselves out of this spiral? There are many answers. For some, it's a low-carb, high-fat diet. For others, it's a Mediterranean diet. For some, it's vegetarianism. For others, it might be something else. You need to find the best solution for you. And that's really the point. We need to take responsibility for our own health. If the food pyramid has taught us one thing, it's this: don't rely on the government to take care of you. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, cardiologist for Prager University.
So let's talk about obesity. Clearly, there's been plenty of studies shown that if you're obese, you're probably going to shorten your life. In fact, if you're extremely obese or morbidly obese or severely obese, you're probably shortening your life up to 10 years. Here's a graph of my weight so far in 2019. And that's what I started. If you look on the upper left, I started up at that very, very high number, and it tracks downward to basically the current date. And notice I have I have the bracket showing obesity, and I'm past the end of the bracket on the right, and that's because I'm no longer in the obese category. The first thing on the chart is to look for my height and then go across. Now, by the way, as we age, we tend to get a little bit shorter. Once upon a time, I was probably 1.5 inches taller than I am today. So too bad, it makes me appear worse on the chart. So that means I have to weigh less. But at any rate, here's what I weighed back in January of this last year, February 1st, when I started my diet, and here it is now. Some folks think that the BMI index is not quite accurate because there's people that like work out really, and they have strong, a lot of muscular, and they say no, the body mass is not quite right because I have a lot of lean muscle. So another factor is called waist to height ratio. The waist to height ratio. Ideally, you should be about 1/2. The diameter of your waist should be about half of your height. And here is a chart that kind of shows the same thing as a BMI. And here's where I was, and here's where I am. And in both cases, I just crossed out of that ugly red area, and I'm now in the repair mode of getting my body better. So what does this really mean? Well, if you don't want to measure yourself, this kind of gives you a comparison. So here's for men. The idea is to get to 0.5. That is ideal. So if you have that kind of a physique, you want to get to 0.5. I was way over here beyond 7. I was right there. Somewhere over here. That's where I was earlier this year. Right now, I am right here. And I want to get there, but I'm here. Okay? I know, but it's what's measured, but thank you very much. And if you're a lady, it's kind of the same, it's the same physique, kind of, I mean, you can look if you're a woman, it doesn't matter what height you are, or what weight you are. I mean, this is the kind of the physique you're looking for, but what's important is what's that number on the bottom. The reason it's important is because of this chart. I'm only going to focus on that column on the far, whoops, I'm pushing the wrong button here. Let's go back. There we go. I'm only going to focus on that chart because it's age 70, not to imply anybody's age here, but I'm 71. I told you this is all about me. I'm 71, and so I'm looking at this chart, and this is called longevity reduction. So I told you I was a 0.6 right now. I was over 7. I was a 0.72, and which meant I took clearly a full 3 years off of my life when I was heavy. Now, I'm only maybe taking half a year off my life, or even less than that, but right now about half a year off my life expectancy. And my objective is to get that thing down to a normal ratio of my waist is half my height. And that would bring me down to 0.5, obviously, and then I could live a normal life expectancy. There you go. Male or female, it doesn't matter. You can see there's some age, sex differences in terms of life expectancy, but it's the same concept. Okay. Now I'm going to turn to away from just the obesity right now. I'm going to move into the category of diseases. I've talked here in the past, and I've mentioned leading causes of death in the United States, but this is worldwide. This is from the World Health Organization. And I kind of call this diseases of affluence. That is a common term when you start doing some research. Notice that on your upper left, there's a chart of diseases, if you can read them or not, but these are worldwide. This is why people die, the various causes of death. And the chart on your right are the causes of death in countries where they're a little more affluent than the poor countries of the world. And of course, there's a totally different diet involved. But notice there's a completely different set of diseases that are present. And they're hardly even close to each other. They're just not. So, this is very current. This year, June of this year, this was published, even though it's the data back in 2017. It takes a long time to get these reports compiled. But this basically are the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. And so we're probably the most affluent country in the world. So this is the most affluent list. The most affluent people in the world. Here are our top 10 leading causes of death. I'm going to go down in this talk and go one by one through every one of those diseases with the exception of accidents. Nutrition probably isn't going to do much for you unless you're eating while you're driving a car. So I would just say don't. Fast while you're driving a car. So we're going to go down those and focus on these diseases. Now this the numbers you're looking at are for all ages. And that also looks like this. If you took a pie chart, it's specifically the one on the left. That's for all ages. But I'm going to focus this talk on us. And so notice I'm enlarging that over the older group. So I'm looking at our age group, our meaning, I hope you're not offended by that, but roughly our age group, plus or minus however many years I can encompass all of this. So some of the diseases went away. For example, suicide is not there, and also there's the accidents are not there. But it's replaced with others. And so I'm going to look at that list that's on your right. We're going to go down that list.
In the last few years, a profound change has begun in American medicine.
Dr. Dean Ornish has studied and written about diet and heart disease for decades.
In medical school, I was learning how to do bypass surgery with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon. We cut people open, we bypass their blocked arteries, and he would tell them they were cured, and they go home and more often than not eat the same junk food, smoke, and not manage stress, not exercise, and then often their bypasses would clog up. So we cut them open, we bypass their bypass, sometimes multiple times. So I said, there's got to be a better way. We spend so much time in medicine mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing without also turning off the faucet. If we just literally or figuratively bypass the problem with angioplasties and stents or lifetimes of drugs or other kinds of interventions, then more often than not, the same problem comes back again. But what we're finding is that if we turn off the faucet, if we treat the underlying causes, which to a large degree are not so much our genes but our lifestyle, that our bodies have a remarkable capacity to begin healing themselves, and these chronic diseases can not only be prevented but even reversed much more quickly than we had once realized. When I went to medical school, I started reading all the medical literature and realized that in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you put them on a bad diet and didn't let them exercise and put them under emotional stress, but you could reverse it if you changed those same things. So I thought, why should people be any different? And everybody said, that's a crazy idea. There's no way that's going to work. You know, what's the matter with you? I've spent more than 30 years of doing these studies, showing that heart disease could be reversed by changing what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much we exercise, and how much love and support we have in our lives. In our model, the physician acts as a quarterback, and he or she assembles a team of 5 other people to work with: a nurse, a yoga teacher, an exercise physiologist, a registered dietitian, and a clinical psychologist. And when we work at that level, we find that people are much more likely to make these sustainable changes. The patient learns how to empower themselves and to transform their lives.
"25 years ago, I had 5 restaurants in San Francisco. It was a great life. I smoked 6 cigars a day, 10 cups of coffee, a lot of wine. It was wonderful. And I had a massive heart attack. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I could hardly just about walk 3 steps, and I'd have to stop and rest. I was popping 20 or 30 nitriles a day. But then Dean Ornish was starting his program to see if you can reverse heart disease through lifestyle change. And he went to my doctor and asked if he could approach me. He told Dean, "How long is the program?" So he said it was a year. And my doctor told him he wouldn't recommend taking me because he didn't think I would live the year. So he figured I was going to die because I was in such bad shape. And now, 25 years later, and I'm in pretty good shape.
We found that after a year, the men who made these intensive lifestyle changes, their physical heart disease improved. It caused their blockages to become less blocked in their arteries. And that was the first study showing that heart disease was reversible. But when you're doing something that has never been done before, it's not universally accepted, to say the least. It was met with a huge amount of skepticism and resistance. People say, well, you're doing this radical intervention. You know, I say, radical? Like compared to having your chest cut open? I mean, give me a break. We need to empower people to change their lifestyle. And if we can make it reimbursable, that really brings it into the mainstream. Now, as you know, heart and blood vessel diseases kill more Americans than virtually everything else combined. And it's treated with things like angioplasties and stents and bypass surgery. And yet, what does the evidence really show? Unless you're in the middle of having a heart attack, which 95% of people who get them are not, they don't prolong your life, they don't even prevent heart attacks. We have a model that works simply by making changes in diet and lifestyles. And in our studies for the last 32 years, we've used very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be.
All right. So I'm going to use this kind of a format of a slide that I'm going to address diseases one by one on that top 10 list. And the first one, of course, is heart disease. And so the kind of things I'm talking about and this is not just limited to these few, but some of these. And if you remember, so those of you who have been kind of following me and seen me when I was a little bit heavier, my Apple Watch detected that I had atrial fibrillation, or AFib condition, last December. And I had a cardiologist appointment that was at the end of January who said, you're going to go on this new diet. So that's when it all kind of started, thanks to my Apple Watch. That's not a plug for Apple Watch, but sure is, isn't it? I guess. You couldn't kind of get that off my wrist. I think it's very important. So I had AFib condition. Oh, by the way, after I got the cardio conversion, the AFib is not returned, and I'm trying to lose all the weight to make all this work properly. So far, AFib has stayed away. All right? So, then I'm going to show you a list of foods. I've been asked by other residents living here to, what are you eating? So, I thought you might like to see the things that I maybe used to eat, but no longer do. And so on the worst column, that's what I was eating. And I also found out I should not have been eating all of those foods. Now I ate the BPA because it's somehow packaging oftentimes uses BPA, and so it cross-contaminates into the food, depending on what the food is. So BPA is also nasty for your heart. Well, the good news is you're going to see this list fairly periodically throughout the talk, but you're going to see it maybe alter with a sequence. I've tried to list these with the best things for this category of disease on the top. It's proven through different kinds of studies. So there is the list with the absolute best things you can eat to prevent heart disease at the top all the way to the bottom. And I try really, really hard to eat those every day as much as I can. By the way, I am not ever hungry. I eat lots of that stuff every day, and I'm losing weight.
Now to a new study that shows diet may be a key tool in the fight against cancer. The study was conducted by Dr. Dean Ornish, who looked at patients with early-stage prostate cancer.
More than half of men over the age of 50 get a PSA test every year to try to detect prostate cancer early. It turns out lots and lots of men had a cancer that didn't need to be treated, but they got treated anyway, and it was causing a lot of harm.
There's very little evidence that these conventional treatments make you live longer, but they cause many men to be impotent or incontinent or both. And so there's a subset of men who have diagnosed biopsy-proven prostate cancer who elect not to get treated conventionally.
My path crossed with Dean's because we both wanted to try and bring rigorous clinical trial testing to this hypothesis that lifestyle intervention could have an important impact in men with early stage prostate cancer.
Hey, how are you? Great seeing you.
I'm one of the busiest surgeons in the country. However, I don't believe every man with prostate cancer needs immediate treatment. So instead, you follow them very carefully and you treat them at the first sign of progression. If you can delay treatment, then that man is not at risk for side effects during that period of time.
Hey, Liz.
Ooh, come in.
Dr. Peter Carroll and I collaborated with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine, and she had done a study showing that stress creates shorter telomeres. And as your telomeres get shorter, your life gets shorter.
Telomeres are the ends of chromosomes, and chromosomes have all our genetic information on them. When telomeres wear down and get frayed, the genetic material would get messed up. That prevents tissues from renewing themselves in the body, and diseases take hold.
I thought most things in biology go both ways, so if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things will make them longer. So we took the men with prostate cancer to see if lifestyle changes can affect gene expression and even telomeres.
The research found that embracing a low-fat vegetarian diet, exercising half an hour a day, and taking part in daily stress-reducing activities can actually change the regulation of genes that are key players in cancer development and contribute to better overall survival.
We found that the men who underwent lifestyle intervention, their PSA rates generally went down and they were less likely to require treatment.
The program increased the telomere length. We even found that when you change your lifestyle, over 500 genes were changed. In effect, turning on the genes that prevent disease, turning off the genes that promote breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer. And even drugs, even pharma, hasn't been shown to do that.
This puts the language of numbers and molecular readouts to Dean Ornish and his interventions that many in the medical field, I think, feel more comfortable with.
These lifestyle changes can not only work as well as drugs and surgery, but often even better at a fraction of the cost, and the only side effects are good ones.
It is now 8 years since the famous Ornish study was published, suggesting that 12 months on a strictly plant-based diet could reverse the progression of prostate cancer. Wait a second, how were they able to get a group of older men to go vegan for a year? They home-delivered prepared meals to their door, figuring men are so lazy they'll just eat whatever's put in front of them. But what about out in the real world? Realizing that you can't even get most men with cancer to eat a measly 5 servings of fruits and veggies, researchers settled on just trying to change their A to V ratio, the ratio of animal to vegetable proteins, and indeed were successful in cutting this ratio in half at least, from about 2-to-1 animal to plant to kind of half vegan, 1-to-1. How'd they do? Looks like their cancer was slowed down. The average PSA doubling time, an estimate of how fast the tumor may be doubling in size in the half-vegan group, slowed from 21 months to 58 months, so the cancer kept growing, but with a part-time plant-based diet, they appeared to be able to slow down the tumor's expansion. What Ornish got, though, was an apparent reversal in cancer growth. The PSA didn't just rise slower, it trended down, which could be an indication of tumor shrinkage. So the ideal A to V ratio may be closer to 0. If there's just no way Grandpa's going vegan, and we just have half measures, what might be the worst A and the best V? Eggs and poultry may be the worst, respectfully doubling and potentially quadrupling the risk of cancer progression in this study out of Harvard. Twice the risk eating less than a single egg a day, quadruple the risk eating less than a single serving of chicken or turkey. And if you could only add one thing to your diet, cruciferous vegetables. Less than a single serving a day of either broccoli or Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, or kale may cut the risk of cancer progression more than half, defined as cancer coming back, spreading to the bone, or death. This animal-to-plant ratio might be useful for cancer prevention as well. For example, in the largest study ever performed on diet and bladder cancer, just a 3% increase in the consumption of animal protein was associated with a 15% higher risk of bladder cancer, whereas a 2% increase in plant protein intake was associated with a 23% lower risk. Even little changes in our diet can have significant effects.
So that's what's important. Little changes, but the more, the better. So let's take a look at this. And I've just thrown up a few categories of cancer, but now we're going to use that same format. And here's the list of the worst foods. You heard them already on that video in order, the worst at the top, and then downward. Okay, so the worst of the worst is at the top of that list. The best of the best is at the top of this list. And you heard her talk about it. That's what I'm eating. I am eating this in abundance. I have prostate cancer. I found out in August. I have stage 3 prostate cancer. And I'm hoping this diet is going to help. 1 week ago, I had radiation therapy treatment. So I have radiation seeds implanted in my prostate, so That's the reason for my radiant smile these days. So I'm hoping, in a very big way, I'm hoping that all will go well. And those of you who pray, you can pray for me as well, and I appreciate that. So anyhow, we're going to move on. I don't want to dwell on me too much, but I have lots of hope that a combination of standard treatments as well as nutrition is going to help out my prostate cancer. So, next. So, respiratory. Respiratory, this is the lower respiratory area. And again, a list of foods that are associated in the same format, helping or hurting. But what's interesting is that now the best, notice the top of the list is turmeric. So if you have, and it's been known, even without drug intervention, turmeric can turn around respiratory disease. Not in all cases, but it can in some cases. And so, although it's in a root form, naturally in the produce aisle, you can also just use the stuff that's in a jar. I would not recommend a tablet or a pill or capsule. They don't get digested and into your system nearly as effective as the whole food. So that's why this is whole food plant-based as opposed to pill-based plant food. So there is a difference, and you'll find that going for the whole food might make a difference for you.
My name's John Mandrola. I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist, heart rhythm doctor in Louisville, Kentucky. Been there for 20 years, my 20th year. I do consultative heart rhythm work, and I'm interested in atrial fibrillation. One of my interests in cardiac electrophysiology, heart rhythm care, is the influence of lifestyle and how lifestyle can actually be both preventive and also therapeutic for patients. And we've undergone a pretty big transformation in the last 5 to 10 years in our field. We treat atrial fibrillation. It affects millions of people. It used to be that we thought of atrial fibrillation as its own disease, a heart rhythm disease. It required medicines, procedures. But now the transformation is that we're beginning to understand that atrial fibrillation is actually a sign or manifestation of other kinds of typical cardiac diseases like obesity, poor diet, sleep apnea, alcohol intake, lack of exercise. And the transformation is understanding how lifestyle can make a significant impact on both the heart rhythm and the overall health of people. So in medicine, we're taught to find the underlying cause of diseases or conditions, and we treat that underlying cause. And I think the big news in atrial fibrillation care is that in most cases, there are some special cases, but in most cases, there's causes of atrial fib and they're sort of upstream from the atrium. Things that affect atrial health are things that stretch the atrium, like high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, and even stress and anxiety, over-exercise, for instance, over-endurance exercise. Not typical exercise, but over-exercise. All of these stimuluses or factors can have ill effects on the atrium. When I started medical practice in 1996, 20 years ago, we basically looked for thyroid disease and valvular heart disease. But now that search has been expanded into these other causes like high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, typical metabolic risk factors. And so we search for those and we talk to patients and look for clues of things that could be causing the AFib. And the reason is that if you can correct one of those causes, then you can avoid some of the therapies of AFib. And some of the therapies, the drugs and ablation procedures, they have upsides and they have downsides. And if you don't even have to go there, then that's a huge, huge benefit. Here's the cool thing about risk factor management. If you can get a patient to improve their diet, improve their exercise, sleep better, and reduce their weight, then these metabolic risk factors reduce their risk of having a stroke regardless. And so that's what's disruptive about lifestyle treatment in AFib, is it just doesn't help the rhythm. It might help reduce the risk of stroke by improving the overall cardiac profile of patients. I'm a specialist. I learned to do cardiac procedures. I do cardiac procedures, and they have a role. But really, I'm not just a proceduralist. I'm a doctor. I'm charged with helping patients in their overall health. And really, helping people with their overall health is more than just doing procedures. It's really helping them with all of the factors that go into this. And we have evidence that if you can help people with diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, you'll help them in terms of their heart rhythm, and you'll help them feel better and live longer. And really, that's what being a doctor is all about.
Okay, by the way, all the list of things that he said that was upstream of the atrium, since I have AFib, that's exactly what I've gotten rid of. You have a whole list of things. I had sleep apnea. I meet next month, and I have a CPAP. I'm still using it, but Elizabeth tells me that if she notices if I'm taking a nap sometime, which is not very often anymore, but when I do, I don't snore anymore. And so I'm hoping next month when I meet with my doctor, he'll say, you don't need your CPAP machine anymore. And I'm basically checkmarking all those things that he just talked about. All right, so here's the food list. There it is. Boy, that list on the right, the best foods, sure gets boring. It's the same list over and over and over. It doesn't matter what the disease is, it's the same list. And the list on the left doesn't change much either. But they do change a little bit, only because sometimes I put them in a little bit different sequence based on what I've learned about all these.
In particular, there's growing evidence that dietary patterns, such as the Mediterranean diet, are associated with lower Alzheimer's risk, as well as slower cognitive decline. But which constituents of the Mediterranean diet are responsible? The traditional Mediterranean diet is a diet high in intake of vegetables, beans, fruit, and nuts, and low in meats and dairy. When they tried to tease out the protective components, fish consumption showed no benefit. Neither did moderate alcohol consumption. The two critical pieces appeared to be vegetable consumption and the ratio between unsaturated fats and saturated fats, essentially plant fats to animal fats. In studies across 11 countries, fat consumption appeared to be most closely associated with the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, with the lowest fat intake and Alzheimer's rates in China, to the highest fat and Alzheimer's rates in the United States. But this is grouping all fats together. Harvard researchers examined the relationship between the major fat types to cognitive change over 4 years among 6,000 healthy older women, and found that higher saturated fat intake was associated with a poorer trajectory of cognition and memory. Women with the highest saturated fat intake had 67% greater odds of worse change on brain function. The magnitude of cognitive change associated with saturated fat consumption was equivalent to about 6 years of aging, meaning women with the lowest saturated fat intake had the brain function of women 6 years younger. What if one already has Alzheimer's, though? Previously, this group of Columbia University researchers reported that eating a Mediterranean-style diet was related to lower risk for Alzheimer's disease. But whether a Mediterranean diet, or any diet for that matter, is associated with the subsequent course of the disease and outcomes had yet to be investigated until now. They found that adherence to the Mediterranean diet may affect not only risk for Alzheimer's disease, but also subsequent disease course. Higher adherence to the Mediterranean diet was associated with lower mortality, and the more they adhered to the healthier diet, the longer they lived. Within 5 years, only 20% of those with high adherence died, with twice as many deaths in the intermediate adherence group. In the low diet adherence group, within 5 years, more than half were dead. And by 10 years, 90% were gone, 80% were gone, or less than half. And by the end of the study, the only people still alive were those with high adherence to the healthier diet.
So here's our list. And interestingly enough, whole grains popped up to the top. It's been on the list, but now all of a sudden it's at the top of the list, whole grains. And that includes wild rice, not white rice, not brown rice, wild rice, and all kinds of barleys and soy. I have all kinds of whole wheats, but white, no. For example, earlier in the talk, there was like potato chip, and you can't eat just one couch potato. I do not eat anything processed in a box like that anymore. Or it's potato chips, crackers. I used to eat a lot of pretzels. I mean, all that kind of stuff. Oh no, I was really doing a terrible thing to my body from the prevention of this. So it's whole grains, and that's what is most important. Here's the reason. Look at the list on the left, and you have a 2 to 3 times risk for dementia. And in fact, everything is just, your risk increases. And on the left, it reduces your chance of dementia by half. Amazing. And here's another factor. Dry heating. So if you do it on a grill, or if you do it in the oven or something like that, that is not as good as some kind of moist cooking. Moist cooking means steaming, pressure cooking, something where you're not losing, I mean, it's not dry. There's a difference in how the chemicals that are part of the food gets processed by your body and digested. So there really is a difference on even how you cook it, besides raw. But there is a difference. So favor moist style cooking, even though it might not have quite the look or the taste that you want.
The limitations of high-tech medicine have never been clearer. At the same time that the power of these simple, low-tech, low-cost interventions is also becoming clearer. We could do 1,000 studies with 1 million patients, it would always remain on the fringes. It's all about the Benjamins, as the rappers would say. It's all about the reimbursement. If we can change reimbursement, it's a game changer. We change medical practice and we change medical education. Trying to get Medicare to cover the heart disease program has been by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Most insurance companies will follow Medicare's lead. So I realized that Medicare is the Rosetta Stone. If we get Medicare to cover it, then everyone else will cover it. And if everyone covers it, then it becomes a standard of care. Well, I wanted to bring you up to date on our progress. We've been making a lot. Medicare finally is going to cover our reversing heart disease program. That was 16 years in the making, as you know. It's not like there's one lifestyle program for heart disease and another one for diabetes, another one for changing your gene expression, another one for prostate cancer. It's essentially the same program. It's just a question of the degree that people are willing to make these changes.
That's the key point, Dean. People, so to speak, have a constitutional right to be foolish. I mean, we have to respect that.
If we're really talking about true freedom of choice, they already pay for the drugs and surgery. What we also want them to pay for are for those people who are motivated and who want to change, to give them the support that they need in order to be able to do that.
That's probably too logical for the federal government to pick up on immediately. Yeah. We didn't get into this situation with so many Americans obese, with this level of juvenile diabetes by accident. We got into it because there were a whole host of policies that led us down this path to sick care rather than the focus on prevention and wellness.
Now that Medicare is going to cover the heart disease program, the next step will be type 2 diabetes. Half of Americans will be diabetic or pre-diabetic in the next 10 years. Half. If we can prevent that and even reverse it, that's how we're going to make true health care, not just sick care, available at a time when the medical system is so badly broken.
So here's the list of foods. Again, nothing too different, but notice I put in red type 1. What's the difference there with milk? The top of the list. Well, here's what it is addressing. Type 1 is, of course, infant onset diabetes for versus type 2, which is for older in life, which older in life could be teenagers. But the infant or young adult type 1 diabetes, now there's a link that they found that basically says that if mothers wean their child too quickly and give them whole milk too young, the infant's too young, prior to their body getting some adjustments, that there's a linkage that has sufficient evidence that says that child will probably develop type 1 diabetes. Not probably, but has a greater risk. Has a greater risk of it. That's a better way of saying it. Amazing. Here's flu season, and so here's some foods to think about with flu and pneumonia. Interesting, a food that you haven't seen on the good list is mushrooms. I made a great big batch of them today, earlier, and cooked mushrooms, not raw mushrooms, but they have a very good effect on reducing inflammation as well as preventing infection. So don't be afraid of cooked mushrooms.
Kidney failure may be both prevented and treated with a plant-based diet, and no wonder. Kidneys are highly vascular organs. Harvard researchers found 3 significant dietary risk factors for declining kidney function: animal protein, animal fat, and cholesterol. Animal fat can alter the actual structure of our kidneys, based on studies like this, showing plugs of fat literally clogging up the works in autopsied human kidneys. And the animal protein can have a profound effect on normal kidney function, inducing what's called hyperfiltration, increasing the workload of the kidney, but not plant protein. Eat a meal of tuna fish, and you can see the increased pressure on the kidneys go up within 1, 2, 3 hours after the meal in both non-diabetics and diabetics. So we're not talking adverse effects decades down the road, but literally within hours of it going into our mouth. Now, if instead of having a tuna salad sandwich, though, you had a tofu salad sandwich with the exact same amount of protein, what happens? No effect. Dealing with plant protein is no problem. Why does animal protein cause the overload reaction, but not plant protein? It appears to be due to the inflammation triggered by the consumption of animal products. How do we know that? Because if you give a powerful anti-inflammatory drug along with that tuna fish, you can abolish the hyperfiltration protein leakage response to meat ingestion. Then there's the acid load. Animal foods, meat, eggs, and dairy, induce the formation of acid within the kidneys, which may lead to tubular toxicity, damage to the tiny, delicate urine-making tubes in the kidney. Animal foods tend to be acid-forming, especially fish, which is the worst, and pork and poultry, whereas plant foods tend to be relatively neutral or actually alkaline, base-forming to counteract the acid. So the key to halting the progression of chronic kidney disease might be in the produce market rather than the pharmacy. No wonder plant-based diets have been used to treat kidney disease for decades. Here's protein leakage on the conventional low-sodium diet, which is what physicians would typically put someone with declining kidney function on, switched to a supplemented vegan diet, then back to conventional, plant-based. Conventional, plant-based, turning on and off kidney dysfunction like a light switch based on what was going into their mouths.
Right, so there's your list of things that would go into the mouth. And has some contributions, or up and down, you heard him say, it's the acid load associated with seafood. Oftentimes people get saying, oh, yeah, people ask me, oh, if there's nothing wrong with fish, right? Maybe.
Why is the consumption of dairy products associated with increased risk for Parkinson's? Maybe because they contribute to our exposure to pesticides and other neurotoxins like dieldrin, which continues to be found in the autopsied brains of Parkinson's victims, even though it was banned decades ago, but it lingers in the environment, and we continue to be exposed to the pesticide through contaminated dairy and other animal products. It's unlikely to be due to milk compounds such as calcium, D, fat, or protein, since there's no association with Parkinson's when they're derived from other sources. It could be the milk sugar, though, lactose, accounting for the increased risk of death and bone fractures, as well as Parkinson's, and earlier onset Huntington's disease. But there's a third possibility as well. Milk lowers uric acid levels, and uric acid may be protective against Huntington's, and also slow the decline of Parkinson's, and most importantly, may lower the risk of getting Parkinson's in the first place, thought to be because uric acid is an important antioxidant in the brain, something we've known for over 30 years now. This can be shown directly in human nerve cells in a petri dish. Add the pesticide rotenone, and oxidative stress shoots up. Add the pro-oxidant homocysteine, and it goes up even more. But add some uric acid, and it completely suppresses the oxidative stress caused by the pesticide. But drinking milk has a uric acid lowering effect, citing this study, describing it as a cute effect of milk. But it turned out to be just a cute typo. An acute effect of milk on uric acid levels in the blood. Drink cow's milk, and uric acid levels drop 10% within hours. Drink soy milk, and they go up 10% within hours. Now, for the painful arthritic disease gout, which is caused by too much uric acid, the uric acid lowering effect of dairy is a good thing. But uric acid is a double-edged sword. If our uric acid levels are too high, we can get gout, but if they're too low, it may increase our risk of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis. Here's the 5-year risk of gout in men for various uric acid levels. If our uric acid is over 10, we have a 30% chance of suffering an attack of gout within the next 5 years, whereas at levels under 7, our risk is less than 1%. So it might make sense to have levels as high as possible without going over 7, to protect the brain without risking our joints. But having excessive uric acid in the blood puts more than just our joints in jeopardy. Yes, having too low levels may increase our risk of MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, even cancer, but having too high levels may increase our risk of gout, kidney, and heart disease. So having a uric acid level over 7 isn't just associated with increased risk of gout, but increased risk of dying from all causes. But having a low uric acid level may also shorten our lifespan by increasing mortality. High uric acid is associated with increased risk of death from heart disease, but low uric acid is associated with increased risk of fatal stroke, for example. So keeping uric acid at optimal levels, the sweet spot between 5 and 7, may protect the brain in more ways than one. If you measure the uric acid levels in those with Parkinson's, they come in down around here, which can explain why dairy consumption may increase risk for Parkinson's, because milk pushes uric acid levels down. Dairy may also explain the differences in uric acid levels between meat eaters, vegetarians, and vegans. If you plot men out, vegans are significantly higher than vegetarians, presumably because they don't drink milk, with those eating meat and milk somewhere in between.
So here's the list associated with Parkinson's disease. Notice that there's a caffeine product in there. Actually, caffeine is good. It helps. Caffeine is a good product. Could be other caffeine products as well, but caffeine actually is good from a Parkinson's disease perspective.
One and only Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I ate a lot of meat. They showed us commercials.
Steak, that's what a man eats.
Selling that idea that real men eat meat.
Serious man food.
But you got to understand, that's marketing. That's not based on reality.
I've been teaching fighting techniques to government agencies for more than 15 years. Then I got injured. And Unable to teach for at least 6 months, I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful, eating only plants?
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. And I actually became like a machine.
One of the biggest misconceptions in sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
Sometimes you have to do things that you know your competitors aren't doing.
Today's blood and yesterday's blood.
Sam. I think this is going to wake a lot of people up.
I was recovering better, not getting as sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
We all want to feel great, have more energy.
Cholesterol was 276. Today, 169.
Whoa, now you're talking.
Most guys my age can keep up with the grandchildren. My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
Well, that really was a movie in the theaters. It didn't come here locally, although it was at it was called Fathom event at one theater in Stockton, close to us. I didn't go to it, but it's available online. You see where I've noted it at the top of the screen. You can get all those, and I have rented it already and seen it. It's about a 2-hour movie. That was the official trailer for the movie. It was fascinating to me, and I watched it and I loved it. So I had to show you the trailer just to get your attention, if nothing else. So remember, the title of my slide was Change Your Food, Change Your Life. And I hope this has been a journey that you're with me. I got one little short video that's going to talk about that little change of food and how it changes your life. And then we're finished. Here it goes.
In 1903, Thomas Edison predicted that the doctor of the future would give no medicine, but would instead instruct their patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. 101 years later, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was born. We still prescribe drugs when necessary, but our emphasis is based on the understanding that the leading causes of disability in the United States and the leading causes of death are caused mostly by lifestyle, particularly what we put in our mouth, food and cigarettes. An impressive number of studies have shown that lifestyle is the root cause of what ails us. The good news, though, is that by changing our lifestyle, we can dramatically improve our health. We have the power. For most leading causes of death, we've long known that our genes account for at most 10 to 20% of risk, given the fact that rates of killers like heart disease and major cancers differ up to 100-fold among various populations, and that when people migrate from low-risk to high-risk countries, their disease rates almost always change to those of the new environment. For example, at least 70% of strokes and colon cancer are avoidable, over 80% of coronary heart disease, over 90% of type 2 diabetes, avoidable. So maybe it's time we stop blaming our genes and focus on the 70% plus under our control. That may be the real solution to the healthcare crisis. And it doesn't take much. Adhering to just 4 simple healthy lifestyle factors can have a strong impact on the prevention of chronic diseases. Not smoking, not being obese, half-hour exercise a day, and eating healthier, like more fruits, veggies, whole grains, less meat. 4 simple things cut our risk of developing a chronic disease by 78%. 95% of disease risk out the window. 80% of heart attack risk, gone. Half a stroke risk, a third of cancer risk, simply gone. Think of what that means in terms of the numbers. As it stands now, each year, 1 million Americans experiences their first heart attack or stroke. 1 million get diabetes, 1 million get cancer. If we clean up our act, we actually get to live longer too? Well, the CDC followed about 8,000 Americans 20 years or older for about 6 years. They found that 3 cardinal lifestyle behaviors exerted an enormous impact on mortality. People who do not smoke, consume a healthy diet, and engage in sufficient physical activity can substantially reduce their risk of early death. And by not smoking, they just meant not currently smoking. By healthy diet, they just meant in the top 40% in terms of complying with the rather wimpy federal dietary guidelines. And physically active meant averaging about 21 minutes a day or more of at least moderate exercise. Those that managed at least one of the 3 had a 40% lower risk of dying. Those that hit 2 out of 3 cut their chances of dying more than half, and those that scored all 3 flushed 82% of their chances of dying in those 6 years down the drain. What does that mean in terms of how much longer we get to live? A similar study on health behaviors and survival didn't just take people's word on how healthy they were eating. They measured the level of vitamin C in people's blood as a biomarker for how many plants people were eating. And the drop in mortality risk in those nailing all 4 healthy behaviors was equivalent to being 14 years younger. It's like turning back the clock 14 years.
Well, that's the end of my talk. And I really thank you for being a wonderful, attentive audience. I saw many of you taking notes. I'm here to answer any questions. I know it's been a long talk, and I appreciate it, but I thought I had to go down that list of diseases. It applies to all of us in the room, and all of our relatives, too, if they're older or younger. It doesn't matter. So this is information that's really good for you. I'm hoping that I'll get this posted on YouTube. And if you need a copy or look for it, you'll do a search, just look my name up, and you'll probably find it without too much difficulty. And or send me an email, and I'll send you a link.